Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This file is being recorded for the September 2021 edition of Socialism for All, and it's an audiobook and discussion of the resolution adopted at the 7th International Socialist Congress at Stuttgart from 1907. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and consider supporting us on Patreon. There's a link to Patreon in the video description. So this was first published in the International Socialist Congress at Stuttgart, August 18 to 24, 1907, from Vorwärts Publishers, Berlin, 1907. The source is Bolsheviks and War, Lessons for Today's Anti-War Movement by Sam Macy, 1985, translated by Sam Macy, HTML markup by Daniel Guido. Thanks as usual to the Marxist Internet Archive for hosting this file at Marxists.org, where you can find thousands of free Marxist texts. Please go check out their site. Quick preface from me. Recently, we put on the channel Lenin's remarks on this meeting of the Second International, and we are following those up with this resolution, as Lenin recommended reading what documents could be found from it. So, let's get into the audiobook. The Congress confirms the resolutions adopted by previous international congresses against militarism and imperialism, and declares once more that the struggle against militarism cannot be separated from the socialist class struggle in general. Wars between capitalist states are, as a rule, the outcome of their competition on the world market, for each state seeks not only to secure its existing markets, but also to conquer new ones. In this, the subjugation of foreign peoples and countries plays a prominent role. These wars result, furthermore, from the incessant race for armaments by militarism, one of the chief instruments of bourgeois class rule and of the economic and political subjugation of the working class. Wars are favored by the national prejudices which are systematically cultivated among civilized peoples in the interest of the ruling classes for the purpose of distracting the proletarian masses from their own class tasks, as well as from their duties of international solidarity. Wars, therefore, are part of the very nature of capitalism. They will cease only when the capitalist system is abolished, or when the enormous sacrifices in men and money required by the advance in military technique and the indignation called forth by armaments drive the people to abolish this system. For this reason, the proletariat, which contributes most of the soldiers and makes most of the material sacrifices, is a natural opponent of war which contradicts its highest goal, the creation of an economic order on a socialist basis, which will bring about the solidarity of all peoples. The Congress, therefore, considers it as the duty of the working class, and particularly of its representatives in the parliaments, to combat the naval and military armaments with all their might, characterizing the class nature of bourgeois society and the motive for the maintenance of national antagonisms, and to refuse the means for these armaments. It is their duty to work for the education of the working class youth in the spirit of the brotherhood of nations and of socialism while developing their class consciousness. The Congress sees in the democratic organization of the army, in the substitution of the militia for the standing army, an essential guarantee that offensive wars will be rendered impossible and the overcoming of national antagonisms facilitated. The International is not able to determine in rigid forms the anti-militarist actions of the working class, which are naturally different in different countries and for different circumstances of time and place. But it is its duty to coordinate and increase to the utmost the efforts of the working class against war. In fact, since the International Congress at Brussels, the proletariat has employed the most diverse forms of action with increasing emphasis and success in its indefatigable struggles against militarism by refusing the means for naval and military armaments, and by its efforts to democratize the military organization, all for the purpose of preventing the outbreak of wars or of putting a stop to them, as well as for utilizing the convulsions of society caused by war for the emancipation of the working class. Quick comment, that's a real key. So, first of all, you want to have organizations and networks which are capable of disrupting the supply chains for military arms and, vehicles and things like that, so that the proletariat can put an end to capitalist wars. And secondly, and this is really the key, utilizing the convulsions of society caused by war for the emancipation of the working class. I think that this is really key. A lot of people look at, say, the United States, and it's like, when are we going to have a revolution here? Okay, well, first of all, organizations and networks, that's key. But also, the U.S. has been fighting all these wars and is exhausting itself. What we see is that when capitalist crises, they try to resolve them in wars, this is a real weak point. Capitalism is at its weakest after this. So, for example, at the end of World War I, you get the Russian Revolution. And that's exactly what they did. Very skillfully, they used this crisis within the capitalist system. All the capitalists are fighting each other. Support for capitalism is at a low. And they use that to the advantage of the socialist movement. So you get a revolution. And then the formation of the Soviet Union comes out of that struggle. Then at the end of World War II, not very long thereafter, about 30 years-ish thereafter, not even quite that long, but around that time, about 30 years later, you get another major convulsion of competition between imperialists by military means. And what happens in the wake of World War II? Half of Europe goes socialist. And then China also has a revolution, and so on. So this is really key, taking advantage of those weaknesses. And, the way that the U.S. is burning itself out, it is definitely heading into a vulnerable period. I don't know, how much we socialists can do. U.S. consciousness is pretty fucked, and just the levels of organization are pretty low. But you never know, and I really don't want to rule anything out. There really can be surprises. We saw some big uprisings in 2020. And to me, that is source of a lot of hope that people will just say, fuck it, and get out in the streets. And, it's time for us then, socialists, communists, to get out there and try to provide some direction and advice and win over the masses to having a permanent revolutionary solution to this crisis rather than just having it drag on and have 2008 and then, just this cycle repeating. All right, back to the text. This was evidenced especially by the agreement between the English and French trade unions following the Fashoda affair for the maintenance of peace and for the restoration of friendly relations between England and France, by the procedure of the Social Democratic parties. Comment, remember, Social Democratic at this point just meant Marxist, socialist, the SOCDEMs and the Radlibs were still in the same overall group with the Bolsheviks or communists. So Social Democratic prior to the Russian Revolution means all of those groups. So doesn't mean social democracy as we think of it today. Okay, back to the text. By the procedure of the Social Democratic parties in the German and French parliaments during the Morocco crisis, the demonstrations arranged by the French and German socialists for the same purpose, the concerted actions of the socialists of Austria and Italy who met in Trieste in order to prevent a conflict between the two countries, furthermore by the energetic intervention of the socialist workers of Sweden in order to prevent an attack upon Norway, finally, the heroic self-sacrificing struggle of the socialist workers and peasants of Russia and Poland in order to oppose the war unleashed by Tsarism, to put a stop to it, and to utilize the crisis of the country for the liberation of the working class. All these efforts are evidence of the growing power of the proletariat and of its increasing ability to secure the maintenance of peace by resolute intervention. The action of the working class will be all the more successful, the more that its spirit is prepared by a corresponding action, and the labor parties of the various countries are spurred on and coordinated by the International. The Congress is convinced that, under the pressure of the proletariat, by a serious use of arbitration, in place of the miserable measures of the governments, the benefit of disarmament can be secured to all nations, making it possible to employ the enormous expenditures of money and energy, which are swallowed up by military armaments and wars for cultural purposes. If a war threatens to break out, it is the duty of the working classes and their parliamentary representatives in the countries involved, supported by the coordinating activity of the International Socialist Bureau, to exert every effort in order to prevent the outbreak of war by the means they consider the most effective, which naturally vary according to the sharpening of the class struggle and the sharpening of the general political situation. In case war should break out anyway, it is their duty to intervene in favor of its speedy termination and with all their powers to utilize the economic and political crisis created by the war to rouse the masses and thereby to hasten the downfall of capitalist class rule. And that's the end of the audiobook. So, encouraging words. We certainly need more of this today. I was part of the anti-war movement in 2002, 3, etc. And there were a lot of people there. I would say it was mainly a left-wing movement. You would get some libertarians trying to glom onto it, like, yay, capitalism without war. No, you can't have capitalism without war, actually. And please go away and take your hyper-capitalism, proto-fascism with you. Anyway, libertarians, yeah. Anyway, what I saw as the 2000s rolled on and the outrageous injustices of the Bush-Cheney regime rolled on was I saw a lot of people get demoralized, fatigued, exhausted, burned out. And there, were some good anti-war coalitions that kept doing actions for years, but it really did get burned out. And then in 2008, it was like, oh my God, everybody's losing their money and jobs and everything else, houses in some cases. So the movement really struggled, in the absence of good, solid socialist parties that aren't just fringe parties. The Democratic Party, which has been out there destroying every movement and party and everything else that had an actually genuinely proletarian character that was even vaguely interested in pursuing socialism. That's what you're left with. So in 2006, after years of just kind of rubber stamping what the far-right Republican Party was pushing, of course, it's coming down to both parties from the 1%. They play to different bases. The Republicans play to the far right, the Democrats play to everybody else, and then anybody that they can't play to, they just try to ignore, suppress, and crush. So, it rolls on until we make an independent left. This is really what we need. I said it before, I'll say it again. The fundamental task of the U.S. left is to break completely with the Democratic Party and with all bourgeois parties. Republicans obviously no, and libertarians obviously no. Also, to me, about half the Green Party has some potential. Then you have all the other parties out there which may or may not run people regularly in elections. But we need a coalition. We need a network to bring together the independent left. And then obviously, Socialism for All being a Marxist channel, we want the Marxist faction within that, ideally to be dominant. So we need to build this movement of, modern day Marxism to be strong enough that it can hold its own in that coalition and not wind up, feeding some kind of populist thing that is anti-communist in nature. We want to build up our numbers. Otherwise, that's really going to be no good. You're going to get bad outcomes that aren't really effective for socialism, for working class liberation. So I think that we're still at the point of building that strength. There's a lot of, kind of dumb populism going on, that's sort of knee-jerk anti-establishment contrarianism. We really need to go deeper, and that's why we do the education that we're doing on this channel, so that as quickly as possible, people can get more of the correct positions on things and, act accordingly. Anyway, I'll leave it at that for now. Hope you've enjoyed this audiobook. Thanks for listening. Thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall. If that's not your thing, understandable. If you can hit like, share, subscribe, maybe leave a comment, even just for the algorithm, it helps to boost this channel, helps more people to see it, and ultimately expands this conversation about opposing capitalism and learning how to build socialism. Thanks again, and we will catch you in the next video.